Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack an ancient text that perfectly captures the very modern struggle with anxiety and doubt. We're looking at Psalm 77 today. It's this incredible piece of ancient poetry from the English Standard Version of the Bible. But honestly, what's going to strike you immediately is just how remarkably modern the psychology of it feels. It takes us on a journey that starts in the absolute darkest depths of an anxious mind, and then systematically walks us through the process of finding solid ground again. Now, I want you to look at this quote because it is instantly relatable to literally anyone who has ever stared at the ceiling during a sleepless, anxiety-ridden night. Just read those words, "You hold my eyelids open." The author is experiencing an intense, agonizing bout of insomnia. They're so consumed by their inner turmoil, so completely overwhelmed by whatever trouble they're facing that they can't even articulate it. "I am so troubled that I cannot speak." I mean, have you ever been there, where the stress is so heavy it literally robs you of your words and your sleep? This isn't just a mild worry. We're talking about a full-blown midnight panic. And this detail right here really grounds our text, showing us that these deep human struggles with despair are completely timeless. The caption tells us it's directed to the choir master, according to Jeduthun. So this was written to be sung. It was meant to be shared communally. The fact that an ancient community was getting together and singing about not being able to sleep because of severe anxiety tells us something incredibly comforting. You are not alone in your dark nights. Humans have been wrestling with these exact same heavy emotions for millennia. Let's see how this actually builds in the first 3 verses. It details a visceral, exhausting physical and emotional toll where, honestly, even remembering God initially brings absolutely zero comfort. Look at the sheer physical exertion happening on this list. The psalmist is crying aloud. They're reaching their hand out in the night without wearying. It's this vivid picture of relentless, restless pacing and pleading. And notice that third point. The soul refuses to be comforted. Sometimes, when we're in the thick of anxiety, we actively reject the very things that might help us. We just kind of wallow in it. In verse 3, the author literally says, "When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints." At this stage in the journey, even their faith is a source of exhaustion rather than peace. That brings us to our first major shift, the questions in the dark, a crisis of faith. So now we enter the absolute darkest part of the night, leading to this frantic search for answers. You can really feel the tension rising with this first rapid-fire question, capturing the terrifying fear of eternal rejection. Will the Lord spurn forever? When you're stuck in a dark place, the present moment feels like it's going to last forever, doesn't it? The psalmist isn't just asking if things are bad right now. They are terrified that this separation, this rejection, is permanent. The crisis of faith really deepens here as the psalmist questions the very foundation of divine love and the reliability of ancient promises. This is a massive escalation. They're asking if God's steadfast love has just dried up and vanished entirely. They are looking at the promises they've built their entire life on and wondering if those promises have essentially expired. It is an absolute structural collapse of everything they thought they knew. And so the crucial point is that this final, devastating question brings the psalmist to the absolute brink, ending in a dramatic pause, or Selah. Has God forgotten to be gracious? Think about that. It's a remarkably bold, almost accusatory question to throw at the divine. Have you just forgotten who you are? Are you so incredibly angry that you've locked your compassion in a box? And right after this explosive question in verse 9, the text just gives us the word Selah. It's a musical or literary pause. It's as if the writer has completely exhausted themselves. They've hit the absolute bottom of the barrel of their despair, and they just have to sit in the deafening silence for a moment. So, what happens next? The turning point. A deliberate choice. This comparison right here brilliantly illustrates the massive emotional hinge of the entire poem. You can see the stark contrast as the psalmist makes a conscious, incredibly deliberate choice to pivot away from their internal turmoil and shift their focus outward toward historical remembrance. Look closely at these two phrases side by side. In verse 6, the diligent search was entirely internal. They were rummaging through their own spirit, their own feelings, their own exhausted mind, and they found nothing but panic. But in verse 12, the strategy completely changes. I will ponder all your work. They stop looking inward at the chaos of their own emotions, and they start looking backward at the objective, historical facts of what God has already done. This right here is the circuit breaker for their anxiety. By shifting the pronouns from I and me to you and your, the psalmist begins to literally pull themselves out of the dark by actively remembering past redemption. Notice the incredibly powerful verbs being used here. Appeal, remember, meditate, ponder. This isn't passive at all. It's an active, muscular effort to redirect the mind. The author says, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. They commit to remembering the deeds of the Lord and the wonders of old. They're essentially looking in the mirror and saying, my current feelings are lying to me right now, so I need to remind myself of the historical record.
Which leads us to the grand finale, the unseen footprints, power, and redemption. This deliberate choice to remember unlocks the epic imagery of the poem's second half, anchoring on the historical redemption of the Exodus. Let's map out this incredible poetry from verses 16 through 18. Look at how it uses chaotic, explosive forces of nature to describe ultimate divine power. Check out the dynamic reactions in this table. When the divine presence shows up, the elements just lose their minds. The waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds pour out water, the skies give forth thunder and lightning, described here as flashing arrows. The voice of the thunder is in the whirlwind, and the earth itself trembles and shakes. It is a scene of absolute overwhelming chaos. But here is the brilliant twist. This isn't a storm meant to destroy the psalmist. This is the storm of God tearing the Red Sea apart to rescue his people. The chaos is actually the mechanism of deliverance. And then, after all that thunder and lightning, the energy drops to this profound, quiet realization that God's path was right through the impossible obstacle, even though he left absolutely no visible trace. This is, for sure, one of the most beautiful verses in all of ancient literature. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. Just think about what that actually means. The Israelites were facing an impossible, deadly obstacle, the sea. God didn't take them around it. His path was directly through it. But water doesn't hold footprints, right? Once the sea crashed back together, there was zero physical evidence left behind that God had just walked through there. He was completely present, actively working a massive rescue, and utterly invisible all at the exact same time. So, we are left with this final, truly provocative thought to ponder. How often in our own dark nights does rescue arrive unseen, working behind the scenes in ways we can only recognize when we look back? The psalmist realizes that just because you can't see the footprints doesn't mean God didn't walk right through the waters with you. And that is exactly how they answer their own midnight anxiety. They move from a terrifying internal panic attack to an awe-inspiring realization that deliverance is often happening right in the middle of the storm, even when we can't see the evidence of it until long after the waters have finally settled. I hope this deep dive into Psalm 77 has given you a helpful new framework for navigating those moments when you are troubled and cannot speak. So, the next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., will you remember the unseen footprints?